The phone was still connected. I could hear the faint hold music cutting in and out, that tinny little jingle from the kitchen store's customer service line. My husband Derek had just snatched my cell phone right out of my hand, actually grabbed it mid-sentence, and told the representative on the other end that the kitchen was already delivered, that it was a surprise, that everything was fine. And then he held the phone out to me with this grin on his face, this wide, pleased with himself grin I hadn't seen in years. I took the phone back. The line was still open, and I said one thing into that phone that changed everything. But let me back up, because if I jump straight to that moment, you won't understand why those words mattered so much. You won't understand what 13 years of slow, quiet suffocation feels like when it finally cracks open in a single Tuesday morning phone call. My name is Renata. I'm 52 years old. I've worked as a barista at a little cafe called Saltwater Grounds for going on 9 years now. We're right on the main drag of Pelican Cove. That's a small coastal resort town on the Gulf side of Florida. The kind of place that smells like sunscreen and fried grouper from May through September, and turns into a sleepy, fog-wrapped village the rest of the year. I love it in the off-season, always have. In early spring, before the tourists flood back, the whole town exhales. The pelicans sit on the pier pilings like old men reading newspapers. The water goes this particular shade of slate gray that nobody photographs, but that I find more beautiful than any postcard turquoise. I've lived here for 16 years. I moved to Pelican Cove when I was 36, freshly divorced from my first husband. A quiet, bloodless divorce. No children, no drama. Just two people who had become strangers. And I built something small and good for myself. I rented a 2-bedroom bungalow, 4 blocks from the beach. I got a part-time job at Saltwater Grounds that eventually became full-time when the original owner, a woman named Claudette, decided she trusted me more than anyone else on staff. I learned the regulars' orders by heart. I bought a second-hand kayak. I adopted a dachshund from the county shelter and named her Margot. Margot. God, she was already 6 years old when I got her. This low-slung, stubborn little creature with a graying muzzle and an opinion about everything. The vet said she had classic dachshund spine and would need to be watched. I watched her for 11 years. She's 17 now, which is ancient for her breed, and she still insists on sleeping against my left leg every single night, wheezing faintly like a tiny radiator. I was happy those first years in Pelican Cove. Not ecstatically happy, I'm not built for ecstasy, but quietly, solidly happy. The kind of happy that doesn't announce itself. And then I met Derek. He came into Saltwater Grounds on a rainy Thursday in late November. I remember because we almost never got proper rain in November back then, and the whole cafe smelled like wet sand and eucalyptus from the candle Claudette kept by the register. Derek was 44 at the time, 8 years older than me, with dark hair going silver at the temples and the kind of easy, unhurried manner that I mistook for confidence. He ordered a cortado, which told me he knew his coffee. He tipped well. He came back the next day, and the day after that. We talked. He was a contractor, he said. Custom renovations, high-end residential. He'd relocated to Pelican Cove from Atlanta to be closer to his mother, Vivian, who had a condo on the north end of the island. He seemed devoted to her. I thought that was touching. I should have looked closer at what devoted actually meant. We dated for almost 2 years before he proposed. Simple ring, simple dinner. A proposal on the pier at sunset that was genuinely sweet and not at all performative. I said yes. I was 39. I was in love. I thought I understood who Derek was. We got married in February, 13 years ago this past February, at the Pelican Cove courthouse with 2 witnesses and dinner afterward at a seafood place we both loved.
No big wedding. That was my preference, and Derek agreed without argument. It was one of the things I liked about him. He didn't argue much. I understand now that there's a difference between a man who doesn't argue and a man who simply waits. The early years were genuinely good.
We combined households. He moved into my bungalow, which was bigger than his rental, and we settled into a rhythm. I worked mornings at saltwater grounds. He ran his contracting business, which had its feast and famine cycles, but generally brought in solid money. We took care of Margot together. We cooked. We watched the Gulf from our back porch on weekend evenings. Derek was handy in all the ways you'd expect from someone in his profession, and the bungalow slowly improved. New deck boards, a repaired roofline, a proper tile job in the bathroom that I'd been putting off for years. His mother, Vivian, was a presence from the beginning. She called him every day. Every single day without exception. I don't mean that as a figure of speech. I mean there was not one day in 13 years when she didn't call. She was 71 when we married, a small, sharp-eyed woman with expensively highlighted hair and the particular brand of Southern politeness that functions as a delivery system for criticism. She never said anything overtly unkind to me. She didn't have to. She had a talent for making me feel like a guest in my own life. But the person I really didn't see coming was Vivian's new husband. Derek's father had passed away long before I came into the picture, a heart attack when Derek was in his late 20s. Vivian had remarried when Derek was around 35, a man named Garland, who was pleasant enough and mostly stayed out of family business. Garland died of a stroke about 4 years into my marriage to Derek, and I felt genuinely sorry for Vivian. She seemed devastated. I reached out. I brought food. I tried. Then, about 2 years after Garland's death, Vivian met Patricia. Patricia was not a romantic partner. She was the woman Vivian's neighbour introduced her to at some HOA social event. A widow herself, recently moved to the condo complex, originally from Savannah. Patricia was 63 at the time, brassy and blunt in a way that Vivian initially seemed to find refreshing. They became fast friends. Patricia had opinions. Patricia had plans. Patricia had, as I would come to understand, a very specific idea about how Vivian's finances and family resources ought to be managed. And Patricia decided, for reasons I still don't fully understand, that I was the problem. She never said it directly. She wasn't stupid. But within 6 months of entering Vivian's orbit, Patricia had become a constant fixture at Vivian's condo, and Derek's visits there, which had always been frequent, became almost daily. He'd stop by after job sites. He'd run errands for his mother. He'd have dinner over there 2-3 nights a week. I wasn't invited most of the time, but when I was, Patricia would be there at the table, watching me with this careful, assessing look, like she was calculating something. I told myself it was just a personality clash. I told myself Derek's closeness to his mother was something I'd always known about and chosen to accept. I told myself that Patricia was just a harmless busybody. What I didn't realize, not yet, not for a long time, was that the financial suffocation had already begun. It was subtle at first. Derek's contracting business had a bad quarter. He asked if we could pull from our joint savings to cover a supplier invoice. I agreed. The quarter after that was better, he said, but there were taxes. Then equipment. Then a deposit on materials for a big job that was going to pay out in 60 days. The payouts always seemed to be 60 days away. The savings account, which I had been contributing to steadily from my barista income, not a glamorous income, but consistent, and I was careful with money, began to drop. I brought it up gently once, maybe 8 months into this pattern. Derek nodded seriously and said he was restructuring the business. He showed me some paperwork I didn't fully understand. He talked about cash flow. He was patient and reasonable, and I felt foolish for worrying. I was working double shifts at saltwater grounds by then. My knees were starting to feel it. 8 hours on tile floors at 51 is a different proposition than it was at 42. But I told myself it was temporary. The kitchen was supposed to be a turning point. That's the bitter irony of all this. The whole kitchen renovation was my idea, my savings, my dream. The bungalow's kitchen was the one room we'd never touched. Original 1980s cabinets, a dishwasher that sounded like a helicopter taking off, countertops that had seen better decades. I had been quietly setting aside money for 3 years. Not from the joint account, which I no longer trusted the way I once had. From a personal savings account I'd opened at a credit union on the mainland, the kind of thing I did almost without thinking, almost as a reflex, because some part of me already knew. $9,400. That's what I had saved. It took me 3 years on a barista's wages, watching every dollar, bringing my lunch to work, skipping the one vacation we'd been vaguely planning. I found a kitchen package at a store called Coastal Cabinet Company over in the next town. Solid wood shakers, quartz countertops, new sink and faucet, the works. The sales rep, a young woman named Daria, was wonderful. We spent 2 hours going through options. I paid the deposit in full, 60% down, the rest due on delivery, and scheduled the installation for the second week of March. It was the first week of March, a Tuesday, when I called to check on the delivery timing. Early spring had come to Pelican Cove the way it always does, tentatively, the sea oats bending in a warm wind off the Gulf, the cafe starting to fill up again with the first trickle of snowbirds heading home. I was standing in our kitchen looking at those ugly cabinets for what I thought was almost the last time, and I dialed the store's customer service number. Hello, is this Coastal Cabinet Company? I paid for the full kitchen set, the Harborview package, and I'm just checking on my delivery window because I haven't received a confirmation yet. The woman on the line asked for my name and order number. I gave both, and then Derek came around the corner from the hallway. I don't know how much he'd heard, but he was looking at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between amusement and something harder underneath, and he held out his hand for my phone. I hesitated. Just a second. He took it anyway. Hey there, he said into the phone, easy as anything, that unhurried voice I'd once mistaken for confidence. Sorry about the confusion. The kitchen set's already been delivered. It's over at my mom's apartment. Surprise! He laughed a little. We're doing a renovation for her. My wife just got the orders mixed up. Everything's good on our end. He held the phone back out to me. The customer service rep was still there. I could hear her breathing, waiting to see if there was anything else she could do. My hand was steady when I took the phone back. I don't know why. It should have been shaking. Everything inside me was shaking. The 3 years of double shifts, the $9,400, the savings account I'd built, dollar by dollar, because some quiet, watchful part of me had always been preparing for something I couldn't name. I put the phone to my ear. Margot wandered into the kitchen from the hallway just then, her nails clicking on the old linoleum, her gray muzzle tipped up toward me. 17 years old. Still here. I looked at my dog. I looked at those ugly cabinets that were apparently still going to be my cabinets. And I said one thing into that phone. Not to the customer service rep. To Derek. With the line still open, so there was a witness. I need to place a stop on that delivery order, I said. My name is Renata Voss. The order number is HC4471. I'm the account holder, and I'm requesting that no further deliveries be made until I speak with your store manager directly. Please note this call as documentation of that request. Dead silence from Derek's side of the kitchen. The customer service rep, her name tag had said Daria when I'd been in the store, But this was a different voice. Someone on the phone line asked me to confirm my billing address and the last four digits of the credit card used for the deposit. I gave them both. My credit union card, my account, my $9,400. "I've flagged the order," she said carefully. "You'll receive a confirmation email within the hour. Is there anything else I can help you with?" "No," I said. "That's everything. Thank you." I ended the call. Derek was still standing in the kitchen doorway. The grin was gone. What had replaced it was something I'd never quite seen on his face before. Not anger, not guilt, but a kind of recalibration, like a machine adjusting its settings. "Renata," he said, "that was an overreaction." I set my phone face down on the counter, very carefully, the way you set down something you're afraid you might throw. "Was it?" I said, not a question. "Mum needed a kitchen. Her cabinets are falling apart, you've seen them. I was going to tell you." "I just thought... You thought you'd use my savings account to do it. It's a joint household, Derek." I turned and looked at him fully. The order was on my credit union card, the personal account, the one that isn't joint. You knew that. Something shifted in his face. The recalibration completed. He went from caught to reasonable in about 4 seconds, which was actually impressive in a nauseating sort of way. "I was going to pay you back," he said. "I have a job finishing up in 2 weeks, the Hartley renovation, and the final draw is..." "Stop." He stopped. I picked up my phone and walked past him, down the hall and into the bathroom. I locked the door. I sat down on the edge of the tub and I pressed both hands flat against my thighs, and I just breathed. Margot scratched at the door once, twice. I let her in. She climbed onto my feet and wheezed. I sat there for a long time. Here's what I didn't do. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that, because the version of this story where I crumple on the bathroom floor and sob feels more dramatic, more sympathetic maybe, and part of me wishes I had cried. It would have meant I was still surprised. But I wasn't. That's the thing about being slowly suffocated. At some point you stop gasping. You just go very still and start calculating how much air you have left. $9,400. 3 years of double shifts. My kitchen. Already sitting in Vivian's condo on the north end of the island, probably with Patricia, standing in the middle of it telling Vivian how nice the quartz looked. I sat there and I did math. Not emotional math, actual math. I thought about what I knew, what I could prove, what was in my name versus his, what the joint account looked like versus my credit union account, what a divorce attorney in Pelican Cove might charge for an initial consultation. I had no idea, honestly. I'd never looked into it. I told myself for years I didn't need to. I looked it up on my phone right there sitting on the tub edge with Margot on my feet. Family law attorneys on the Gulf Coast. I found 3 within reasonable distance. I screenshot their numbers without thinking too hard about what that meant. When I came out of the bathroom, Derek was in the living room with the TV on. He had the posture of a man who had decided to wait out a storm by pretending it wasn't happening. He looked up. "We should talk," he said. "We will," I said. "Not tonight." I made dinner. I fed Margot. I went to bed at 9:30 and lay in the dark and listened to Derek come to bed an hour later and lie down on his side without touching me, which was fine, which was a relief. I didn't sleep much. The next morning I was at Saltwater Grounds by 5:45 for the opening shift. Claudette had retired 2 years prior and sold the cafe to her nephew, a man named Oscar, who mostly stayed out of our way and let me run the floor the way I always had. The morning rush came in at 6:30. The contractors and dock workers first, then the year-rounders who lingered over laptops, then the first wave of early-season tourists who always seemed slightly surprised to find an actual town here rather than just a beach. My coworker that morning was a woman named Bev. Bev was 67, recently widowed, had been working at saltwater grounds for 3 years because she said she'd go insane sitting home alone, and she'd always wanted to learn how to properly steam milk. She'd learned. She was also the sharpest person I knew in Pelican Cove, which I did not appreciate fully until that particular morning. She watched me work for about 45 minutes before she said anything. "You didn't sleep." "I slept fine." "Renata, I've watched you make 400 lattes. You're tamping like you're trying to punish the coffee." I set the portafilter down, looked at the espresso machine for a moment. Then I told Bev the broad strokes, right there behind the counter between the 6:50 and 7:10 rushes. I told her about the kitchen, about the phone call, about the money, about Patricia and Vivian and the way the savings had been quietly draining for years. I told her about the bathroom floor math. Bev was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Have you talked to anyone official yet?" "I looked up attorneys last night." "Good, but I mean," she hesitated. "Derek did the Hartley renovation, you said?" "He says he's finishing it up. Why?" Bev picked up a cloth and started wiping the counter with the focused attention of someone choosing their words carefully. "Neil Hartley comes in here every Thursday. Has for years. He always gets the same thing. Large drip, room for cream, blueberry muffin. He was in here last Thursday." She paused. "He mentioned his kitchen renovation, said the contractor had bailed mid-job, said he was furious, been trying to get his deposit back." I stared at her. "Derek's company?" I said. "He said the company name. I didn't think anything of it at the time." She looked at me. "It's the same one." The counter was very clean by then. Bev kept wiping it anyway. "So there is no Hartley final draw," I said. Not a question. "I don't know that for certain," Bev said carefully. "But I'd want to know before I waited 2 weeks for money that might not be coming." I thought about the savings account, the cash flow explanations, the paperwork I hadn't fully understood, the 60 days away payouts that were always 60 days away. "Bev," I said, "if I needed to find out what was actually happening with Derek's business, like, legally, what I'd be entitled to know, how would I even start?" "You start," she said, "by calling one of those attorneys you screenshotted last night." I looked at her. "You had your phone face up on the counter when you came in," she said, not unkindly. I saw the browser tab. The morning rush picked back up. We made drinks and smiled at customers, and the cafe filled with the smell of coffee and the particular low murmur of a small town waking up. I moved on autopilot, my hands doing the work my hands had done 9,000 times, and underneath the surface, I was running a list. What I knew for certain: my $9,400 had paid for a kitchen that was now in Vivian's condo. Derek had authorized that without my knowledge or consent, using my personal account. There was a witness, the customer service rep, who could confirm the call in which Derek stated the delivery location. What I suspected but couldn't yet prove: the Hartley renovation had collapsed, which meant the money Derek had promised was not coming, which meant the pattern of financial drain was not a business cycle. It was something else. What I needed? Documentation, a timeline, an attorney who could tell me what Florida law said about marital assets, separate accounts, and the kind of quiet financial maneuvering that doesn't look like theft until you lay it all out in a row. On my lunch break, I sat in my car in the parking lot behind the cafe, in the warm March Gulf Coast air with the windows down, and I called the first attorney on my list. Her name was Lorraine Achebe, and her office was 40 minutes inland. Her assistant told me she had a cancellation on Friday afternoon. I took it. I drove home that evening with a very specific kind of calm. The kind that doesn't mean you're okay. The kind that means you've made a decision, and the decision has weight, and you're carrying it carefully because you can't afford to drop it. Derek was on the phone when I walked in, his mother's voice audible from across the room, even though I couldn't make out the words. He looked up at me, covered the receiver with his hand, and said, "We really do need to talk tonight." "Friday," I said. "Friday?" "I have an appointment Friday afternoon. We'll talk after." He didn't ask what kind of appointment. Maybe he thought it was a dentist. Maybe he'd decided the storm had passed and he could afford to wait. What he didn't know, what he had no way of knowing, was that Thursday was coming first. And Neil Hartley always came in on Thursdays for his large drip and his blueberry muffin. And I was going to be the one behind the counter. Thursday came in grey and soft, the kind of Gulf Coast morning where the fog sits low over the water and the pelicans don't bother flying. I was behind the counter at Saltwater Grounds by 5:45, same as always. I'd barely slept 2 nights running by then, but my hands were steady. Steady in the way that happens when you've stopped waiting for something and started doing something instead. Neil Hartley came in at 7:20. I recognised him from years of Thursday mornings. A heavy-set man in his early 60s, silver beard, the particular unhurried walk of someone who owns property and knows it. He always sat at the far end of the counter, rather than a table. He liked to watch the street. "Large drip," he said, settling onto the stool. "Room for cream." "And a blueberry muffin," I said. He licked up, a little surprised I'd anticipated it. "That's the one." I poured his coffee and set the muffin in front of him, and then I said as naturally as I could manage, "Mister?" "Hartley, I'm sorry to be forward, but I heard you had some trouble with a contractor recently. A kitchen renovation?" He set down his mug, looked at me carefully. "Where'd you hear that?" "Small town," I said. "I'm Renata Voss. Derek Voss is my husband." The silence that followed was not comfortable. Neil Hartley had the face of a man running calculations. How much to say? What it cost him? Whether I was here to smooth things over, or something else entirely. "Your husband," he said finally, "took a deposit of $4,200 from me for a kitchen gut and rebuild. Showed up for demo day, pulled out the old cabinets, left a construction dumpster in my driveway, and then stopped answering calls. That was 6 weeks ago. My kitchen has no cabinets, no countertops, and a dumpster I'm now paying a rental fee on." I didn't say anything for a moment. I let the number settle. $4,200. "Mr. Hartley," I said, "I'm going to give you the name of my attorney. She practices family law, but she'll know who to refer you to for contractor fraud. And I'd ask you to keep a record of every expense you've incurred since you walked off that job. The dumpster rental, any temporary fixes, everything." He stared at me. "Contractor fraud." "I don't know what else to call it," I said. "And I think you probably don't either." He took the card I slid across the counter, Lorraine Achebe's number, which I'd already written on the back of a Saltwater Grounds receipt that morning, because I'd been thinking about this conversation since Tuesday. He looked at it for a long moment, then tucked it into his shirt pocket. "I'm sorry," I said. "For what it's worth. I'm genuinely sorry." "It's not your fault," he said. "No," I agreed. "But it happened under my roof, in a manner of speaking.
and I'm done letting things happen under my roof. He nodded once, slowly, and picked up his coffee. We didn't talk much after that. I refilled his mug twice. He left a $20 bill on the counter, which was double what he owed, and walked back out into the fog. Bev appeared beside me the moment he cleared the door. "Well?" she said. 4,200, I said. Demo day and gone. Bev pressed her lips together.
How many jobs do you think there are like that? I didn't answer, because I didn't know, and I was afraid to guess. Friday afternoon, I drove the 40 minutes inland to Lorraine Achebe's office. She had a small suite in a building that also housed an insurance agency and a tax preparer, which felt appropriately unglamorous for the business of dismantling a life. Her assistant offered me water. I took it. Lorraine was in her mid-40s, compact and precise, with reading glasses she wore on a chain, and the yellow legal pad she filled with notes as I talked. I talked for 40 minutes. I told her everything: the savings account, the kitchen, the phone call, the open line, Derek's statement to the customer service rep. I told her about the Hartley job. I told her about the pattern of the joint account draining, the cash flow explanations, the paperwork I hadn't understood. She asked careful, specific questions. She did not react emotionally to any of it, which I appreciated more than I can say. "The key asset here," she said, when I'd finished, "is the documentation trail on your personal credit union account. That account is in your name only. The payment to Coastal Cabinet Company was made from that account." Derek's statement on the recorded call, and customer service calls are almost always recorded, constitutes an admission that he directed that delivery to a third party without your authorization. Can I get a copy of that recording? We can subpoena it, or in some circumstances, the store will provide it voluntarily as part of a dispute process. I'd start with a written request. She made a note. The Hartley situation is separate but relevant. If Derek has been running a pattern of taking deposits and abandoning jobs, that's potentially criminal. That's a matter for law enforcement and a different kind of attorney. But it speaks to a broader financial picture you'll need to establish in the divorce proceeding. The word sat there between us. Divorce proceeding. How long does it take? I asked. In Florida. If it's uncontested, it can move relatively quickly, a few months. If you dispute the asset division, it takes longer. Given the financial complexity you're describing, I'd plan for 6 months to a year. She paused. But you can file immediately, and I'd recommend doing so before he has time to move or obscure additional assets. I drove home in the late afternoon light, the Gulf visible in flashes between the buildings as I came back into Pelican Cove, silver pink in the March haze. I sat in the car in our driveway for a moment before going in. Derek was in the kitchen when I walked through the door. Standing in that ugly kitchen with its 1980s cabinets and the dishwasher that sounded like a helicopter, like he'd been waiting. He had that careful, reasonable look he'd been wearing all week. "You said we'd talk tonight," he said. "We will." I set my bag down. I sat at the kitchen table. He sat across from me. "Renata," he said, "I know you're upset about the kitchen, and I should have told you what I was planning. That was wrong. But Mom's cabinets were genuinely falling apart. You've seen them. And the timing with your order just seemed like, Derek." I said it quietly. "Stop." He stopped. "I met with an attorney today," I said. "A family law attorney." The recalibration happened again, that machine adjusting settings look. But this time, something else moved underneath it. Something that might have been fear. "That's a big step," he said carefully. "Over a kitchen." "It's not over a kitchen." I folded my hands on the table. It's over 4 years of draining our savings with explanations I didn't understand. It's over the Hartley deposit. It's over the other deposits, Derek, because I don't think Hartley is the only one, and neither do you. His jaw tightened. Where did you... Neil Hartley comes into the cafe every Thursday, I said. Small town. The silence stretched long enough that Margot wandered in from the hallway, clicked across the linoleum, and settled under my chair. I could feel the warmth of her against my feet. How many? I said. How many jobs did you take money on and walk away from? He didn't answer right away. That was its own answer. 3, he said finally. But the Hartley job, there were supply chain issues, the materials costs. Don't, I said. Please don't. I've been making your coffee for 9 years. I can tell when you're measuring your words. He looked at the table. 3 deposits, I said, plus whatever you've pulled from our joint account over the past 4 years. Plus my $9,400, which is sitting in your mother's kitchen right now. I paused. That's not a business in a rough patch, Derek. That's something else. I was going to fix it, he said. His voice had gone quiet, not apologetic exactly, more like a man who has rehearsed his defense and is now watching it fail in real time. I had a plan. There's a development project over in... There's always a project that's 60 days out, I said. I know, I've heard it. He didn't say anything. Here's what's going to happen, I said. I've retained Lorraine Achebe. You'll be served with the filing early next week, probably Tuesday or Wednesday. I'd suggest you find your own attorney before then. I pushed back my chair, slowly. You can stay in the house until we work out the logistics. I'm not going to make this uglier than it has to be. But I need you to understand something. I stood up. The kitchen is coming back, I said. My $9,400 worth of cabinets and quartz countertops are coming out of Vivian's condo and being installed here, where I paid for them to go. My attorney will make that very clear in the filing. If Vivian wants to fight it, she's welcome to, but she'll lose, because the purchase is in my name on my account, and Derek admitted on a recorded line where he sent it. Derek's face had gone still in a way I hadn't seen before. Not the recalibration, something past that. The look of a man who has run out of adjustments to make. Patricia is going to have opinions about that, he said. It came out almost reflexively. I'm sure she will, I said. I've been letting Patricia have opinions for years. I'm done with that too. I picked up Margot, all 12 aging pounds of her, careful not to strain her back, and I walked out of the kitchen and down the hall to the bedroom, and I closed the door. I heard Derek on the phone within 20 minutes, his mother's voice, faint through the wall, and then Patricia's, and then Derek's voice dropping low into the kind of tone that means he's telling someone that things have gotten complicated. Things had gotten complicated. That was accurate. The filing went in on a Tuesday, as Lorraine had predicted. Derek moved to Vivian's condo the following weekend, which I suspect was Patricia's idea, and which worked out fine for all parties. The bungalow was mine. I'd owned it before the marriage, and Florida law had a clear position on that, one that Derek's attorney apparently confirmed for him quickly, because there was no argument about the property. The kitchen arrived 6 weeks later. Coastal Cabinet Company sent a crew of 4, and they worked 2 full days, and on the second evening I stood in my own kitchen and ran my hand along the quartz countertop, cool and solid, and exactly the color I'd chosen, a pale gray with faint white veining, and I felt something I hadn't expected to feel. Not triumph, not relief exactly, more like recognition, like my own house had finally started looking like the place I actually lived. Bev came over that Saturday, and we made dinner together. Proper dinner. She brought a bottle of wine. I made roasted chicken with garlic and lemon, and we ate at the kitchen table while Margot wheezed contentedly under Bev's chair. We talked about small things: the cafe, the spring tourists, the pelicans on the pier pilings, Bev's late husband a little, my first marriage a little, the particular texture of getting older in a place you love. "You seem different," Bev said near the end of the bottle. "Different how?" She thought about it. "Like you stopped bracing for something." I looked around my kitchen. The new cabinets, the clean lines of the countertop, the dishwasher that, when I'd tested it that morning, ran so quietly I'd had to check twice that it was actually on. "I think I did," I said. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that first Tuesday phone call. Lorraine was thorough and patient and worth every dollar. Derek's contracting situation turned complicated. 2 of the 3 abandoned deposit clients filed complaints with the state licensing board, and Neil Hartley pursued a civil claim that settled out of court, but none of that was my fight to finish. I'd handed Lorraine the thread, Lorraine had handed Neil Hartley a referral, and the rest unspooled without me. I never spoke to Patricia again. I saw Vivian once, at the grocery store on the mainland, about 4 months after Derek moved in with her. She looked at me across the produce section with an expression I couldn't fully interpret. Not hostile, not warm, something more like the look of a woman who knows she's holding a hand she helped deal and isn't entirely proud of it. I nodded. She looked away. That was all. I'm 53 now. Margot is still here, still wheezing, still insisting on my left leg every night. The vet says her spine is holding and her heart is strong for her age, and I choose to take that as an instruction on how to live. I still work at Saltwater Grounds. The off-season is here again, that quiet, fog-wrapped version of Pelican Cove that I've always loved best. The sea oats bend in the Gulf wind. The pelicans sit on the pier like old men reading newspapers. The water goes that particular shade of slate gray that nobody photographs. I find it more beautiful than ever. Some mornings, before the first customers come in, I stand behind the counter in the empty cafe and I think about that Tuesday phone call. The hold music, Derek's grin, the phone in my hand, the line still open, and the particular steadiness that comes not from being fearless, but from being done. I said one thing into that phone. I didn't yell it. I didn't cry it. I said it the way you say something you've been quietly building toward for 3 years of double shifts and careful math. I placed a stop on the order. I stated my name. I gave the account number. I asked for documentation. 7 words that changed the direction of everything. The kitchen, the money, the marriage, the life. I've thought about whether I should have spoken sooner, whether I should have asked harder questions about the cash flow, pushed back on the paperwork I didn't understand, trusted the quiet, watchful part of me that had been keeping a separate savings account almost without consciously deciding to. Maybe. Probably. But here's what I've come to. That separate account, the one I'd opened almost as a reflex, as a hedge against something I couldn't name, that account was me knowing. Some part of me always knew. And when the moment arrived, the money was there. The documentation was there. The witness was there. The only thing that was missing was my willingness to say it out loud. I'm not missing that anymore.